Hi, welcome. I'm Jess. I'm one of the women's campaigners here. This event is part of a Women's Voices Amplfied series, which showcases prominent women speakers in arenas where their contributions are often overlooked. For the Women's Sport event, me, Helen and Tabs, who organised this, wanted to strengthen women's engagements in sports at university and ensure that they had positive role models to hear from to tackle their barriers to their engagement. So just like a bit of an introduction to the issue, in the 2012 Olympics in London were hailed for highlighting the achievement of women in sport, who won 36% of our medals and made Jessica Ennis, Laura Trott and Victoria Pendleton, among many other people, household names. At the end of 2012, about 750,000 adults had taken up team sports after the Olympics, and 500,000 of them were women, which marks a huge improvement in women's participation. But only 0.5% of the sponsorship income in sports goes to women, and for every 53 articles written about men, there's only one about sportswomen. So these statistics do not reflect the ability and achievements of our sportswomen. The underrepresentation, underfunding and negative stereotypes of sportswomen has recently received a lot of media attention, and there's a lot of debate over the size of the issue and what can be done to address it. Two examples you may have come across recently are how John Inverdale, the BBC broadcaster and president of Bucks, made sexist comments about Marion Bartali in the Wimbledon ladies final, and the fact that Bucks has yet to reprimand her and him and hasn't allowed the debate to be discussed at their recent AGM. Also, Beth Tweddle, the world champion gymnast, engaged in a live Twitter Q&A recently with Sky Sports and received a huge amount of misogynistic abuse, with stereotypes arising such as pregnancy being a poor excuse for injury that women should be able to run off. So it's a great time to get together a brilliant panel of women who've had a huge amount of professional and personal experience between them in playing, researching, campaigning, in the area of gender equality in sports, so we can discuss together how to level the playing field for sports participation. I'm going to introduce the panellists, who will then speak each about their experiences and views on whether there are equal opportunities in sports and how to overcome any barriers that they may identify. After this, we're going to open up the floor to questions, which Helen is going to be taking from the audience. Feel free to direct your questions and comments to specific people or the entire panel. So firstly, on my far right, we have Shelley Alexander, who's the editorial lead of women's sports at the BBC and was also the programme editor for 5 years of the show Football Focus. She's also co-founded the Women in Football Network, which is a networking group for women in the professional game. Next to her we have Rimla Akhtar, who's the chair of the Muslim Women's Sports Foundation, which is an organisation that seeks to raise awareness and provide opportunities for women, particularly for minority ethnic communities, to participate in sports which take religious and cultural sensitivities into consideration. She also worked with the Olympic organisers to advise them on female representation at London 2012, and in light of these achievements, she won the Community Award at the 2013 Sports Personality of the Year Awards. On my right, we have Sarah Hunter, who's a rugby player for Lichfield in England, which she's captained several times. And she also is a University Development Officer for the Rugby Football Union. On my left, we've got Lottie Birdsall-Strong, who played for Arsenal Ladies under 16 and is now an academic at Cambridge, researching policy options for equality in sports, and spoke at the Parliamentary Select Committee on Women in Sports. And on my far left, we have Jessica Crichton, who is a freelance sports journalist and massive sports fan, but she's very aware of the inequalities that exist between women in women in sports, so makes a concerted effort to celebrate sportswomen and bring attention to the many barriers they face. Jessica has also launched her new women's sports blog today. So can we have a big round of applause for our panellists and thank them for coming today and giving up their time. Shelley, would you like to start off?
So as Jess mentioned, for 5 years I was the programme editor of Football Focus, and it was a thrilling job to have. And actually, when I went for the job, I was the only woman on the shortlist. And when you work in football, often that's the case. And I was a complete rank outsider. And I remember when I was sort of sat nervously waiting to be taken to the interview room, a young lady who I didn't know came up to me and said, you're the only woman on the shortlist. I said, yeah, I know. And she went, go, go, go. And it really, I just thought, yeah, I can do this. I can do it. I didn't think that before, and that's quite a woman thing, isn't it? But I did, and I got the job, and I had 5 sort of glorious years on Football Focus, which I loved. Then I went for another job, and again, the only woman, and I was asked, have you the gravitas for this job? And I asked all the other candidates, who were all men, of course. I said, did you get asked that gravitas question? No. Is it because I was blonde? You know, I mean, it was ridiculous. So I was a bit disillusioned. And then I watched the Olympics, like we all did, and Lizzie Armistead, if you remember, she won the silver in the women's road race. And in her live interview, at that moment of glory, she took that opportunity to say how iniquitous her sport was. That the men's, obviously Sky with British Cycling had their Tour de France team, but there was nothing for the women's team. And the men's team the day before, if you remember, Mark Cavendish should have taken the gold, if you remember. And they'd spent sort of, you know, about 6 months on that strategy and everything. The women, they just spoke a couple of days before amongst themselves, the Team GB women. And Lizzie ended up with a silver medal. And that really made me think, wow, there's a really big job to be done out there to help women, sportswomen, and to get more recognition for them. And the BBC, to be fair, we've always done a really good job. I mean, about 20% of our BBC Sport output is women's sport, and that accounts to about 1,000 hours. But what we found that with the Olympics, because we had that great run-up, we were telling the stories of these wonderful women. We all know the Catherine Granger story, all those silvers, and you know the last sort of opportunity for her in a way, and the Victoria Pendleton story, falling in love with someone in her, you know, backroom staff, and him having to leave, and you know the wonderful Nicola Adams story, you know, fighting to get boxing recognised as a sport, and the time ticking, you know, and then her coming back and taking the gold. And so when I heard that a new job was being created at the BBC, which was the lead on women's sport, I thought this is a wonderful opportunity to make sure that that wonderful momentum and that celebration of women's sport was carried on. So what we did was we just made sure, and I hope when I hear from you about this, but I've been doing the job a year now, and I really hope that we've made a difference in joining up across all our platforms women's sport, so that before you actually come to a sporting event, you actually know a little bit about the personalities. I'll give you an example. The BBC has done the Women's Golf Open for years and years. We do the men's, I mean, this big prestigious event, the Men's Open, but we've done live. We've done 3-4 days of live coverage, and we've never really got a huge audience for that. So this time we decided we would get some women in before, and I don't know if you follow golf, but there was a wonderful Charlie Hull, the young 17-year-old, who sort of helped Europe win the Solheim Cup, and she was doing really well in the season as well. She was coming second on a lot of ladies' European Tour events. And again, I rang, I was at home, and on a Sunday morning, I rang the sport online desk, and it was, to be fair, it was a freelancer who answered, but I sort of said, oh, can you put in, Charlie Hull is tied for first place going into the final round of the Morocco Open, or I think it was, and he said, well, what sport's that? And I said, well, it's ladies golf. And he said, well, is that proper golf? So I said, yes. And then he said to me, well, where do I find the information? And I don't know if you've heard of the Wires, which is where we get all our information, a lot of the information from. I said, well, why don't you have a look on the Wires? And so I can hear him sort of on the computer, and he said, oh yes, there's quite a lot of information on this sport. And that's sort of part of what we're trying to do, sort of get the information out there. So we had Charlie Hull in, and she was a rookie on the Ladies European Tour, and we also had Cheyenne Woods in. Now Cheyenne's the niece of Tiger, and we get them into Media City, and just for a couple of hours of their time, they can go on breakfast TV. They did a hit with Chris Evans on Radio 2. They did the Today programme on Radio 4, which is important because lots of movers and shakers listen to that programme. People who can put money into women's sports, so that's really good. They do the news channel, BBC News Channel, News Round for children. Again, it's great for young girls to see these role models. Charlie's only 17, that's terrific for them. So that's something that we can do really, it's a really powerful thing that we can do to try and raise the profile of live sports that we've got. I suppose if you are sort of most prestigious part of the portfolio last year was the partnership with the FA over women's football. If I tell you that probably before a lot of you were born, I think it was 1992, I actually presented live on Channel 4 the Women's FA Cup final. I don't think it got many viewers, and of course it never really sort of took off. And so it's been tremendous what's happened. And again, going back to the Olympics, there were 70,000 people watching that when England, that's terrible, Team GB, when Team GB with Kim Little, probably the best footballer in the British Isles at the moment, Scotland's Kim Little, played in that team, and when they beat Brazil. And so we had that, we knew that people were really interested, and so we formed a partnership with the FA where we would do live England World Cup qualifiers, live the FA Cup, and also each week have a roundup of the Women's Super League, put the goals online, and so a real partnership. And what was significant, back to what Jess was saying about sponsorship, on the day we signed that agreement, the FA then could sign with two major sponsors. So those two major sponsors were waiting for terrestrial broadcaster, i.e. us, to give them exposure. And so that is the sort of virtuous circle. And I'll just finish by just showing you this. I don't know if any of you were lucky enough to go to the game at the Etihad yesterday, the big game between City and Chelsea. And if you are, lose, I'm sorry. Oh no, but this was in the programme. So for that prestigious match last night, this is a really glossy brochure all about the new Manchester City women's team. And that just shows you how far women's football has come. And Manchester City, look at the slogan on the front, our time is now. And that's just really impressive. And there is still a lot of work to do, but times are changing.
Hi everybody. I thought I'd just give you a bit of background of my journey in sport, and that will maybe help you understand where I sit in terms of equal opportunities. I grew up in the 80s, I was born in the 80s, and I grew up in an area where we were the first non-white family to move in. And if anyone knows the 80s and knows what that meant, you know, I was a young girl growing up, I had two older brothers to protect me, but certainly when reflecting back on some of the incidents, it was pretty brutal, both physical and verbal, sort of racist abuse that we had to deal with. However, the shining light for me, there were three things from my perspective that really kept me going and focused really on my life and the positive aspects of life. One was my family, who are just amazing. Number two was my studies. I was a SWAT, basically. I used to just study. And then the third thing was sport. And when it came to sport, it truly was a place where I just felt nobody cared about the colour of my skin, nobody cared that I was a woman, nobody cared that I wore a piece of cloth around my head when I started to wear it. It was just purely, can I, you know, kick that ball into the net, or can I shoot it into that hoop, or can I stop it from going into the goal? It was just that. So I was constantly focused on that, whether it was at primary school, whether it was at secondary school. And it was only really when I hit university and my experiences went from the sort of local grassroots county level to a kind of higher level that I really got an experience of what sport can truly do. And that came through my involvement with the Muslim Women's Sport Foundation, which started in 2001. And in that year, it was the first year that a non-Muslim country had been invited to participate in what was then known as the Muslim Women's Games. So these are essentially games that are held every 4 years, like the Olympics. It was being held over in Iran, and we were putting together a British team. So I went for the futsal team trials. Has everyone heard of futsal, by the way? No? Just, yeah, that might be an interesting thing to tell you about. So futsal is a five-a-side version of football, played indoors. It's got a smaller ball, so it doesn't, and it's a heavier ball, so it doesn't bounce as much. It's a much more kind of close control, relies on your skills. Probably not the best for the English game at the moment, but something that would really help develop skills going forward, I think. So it was an amazing experience. I made the team. I went to Iran, and I mean, think of Iran and think of some of the messages that are given about Iran and how they treat their women. You actually go out there and you mix with people on the streets of Tehran. You look at the team, the Iranian women's team, and you just think, wow, these girls have got it good. And we're the British team coming over, you know. I remember in 2005 when I was the captain of the team, you know, we went there with a coach that we'd had for about 6 weeks, having trained once every other month with each other, to come across this Iranian team who looked like they were just clones of one another. The same hairstyle, same clothes, absolutely everything. And you know, they brought in a coach from Brazil 6 months prior to make sure that they, you know, won that tournament. Brazil is pretty much the home of futsal, by the way. And you know, they just had the most amazing setup. And having experienced that, I thought, I need to come and do something. I need to help change things, because our women in England and across the UK just do not have the same support network that these women have. And that started for me, really, as I say, with my focus on all women, but actually with a focus specifically on women from a minority ethnic background. So that involved a project that I put together called Born to Succeed, which was about taking a holistic view to sports. So it's not necessarily about how many women and girls can we get coming through participating and playing. That's fantastic, and that's the vast majority of our work, is actually setting up clubs and helping them run and you know, putting on leagues and tournaments and things like that. But actually, how do we get more women into careers in sports? And that's not just in the women's game, that's right across sports. But also, there's one thing, educating the community about the importance of sport and what it can do for you and how you can be involved, but actually there's a lot of education that's needed within the sports industry as well. So actually, over the last 8 years that I've been chair of the Muslim Women's Sport Foundation, that's been the vast majority of my work. You know, Shelley and I sit on the Inclusion Advisory Board at the FA that's just been created, and the idea, and that's the sort of work I've been doing for the last 8 years, it's about educating the governing bodies to say, how can they make their governing body more inclusive? How can they make sure that they're actually reaching out to absolutely every single person in the right way and creating the right environment for them? So from my perspective, I mean, in terms of equal opportunities in sport, things are getting better, and I've actually opened my eyes to that. But as Shelley sort of touched on, and as you know, has been mentioned, there's a lot of inequality out there for women across all areas of sport, across all career sort of paths in sport. But from my perspective, and anyone that knows me will kind of testify to this, if someone tries to put me off the path of getting to where I want to get, so for me, I want to make sport inclusive for everyone. If anyone tries to take me off that path, I kind of put the blinkers on and I say, it's not going to happen. And for me, therefore, persistence is the key way to come through, but also working in collaboratively, I would say. For me, equality isn't about competing against men or saying, you know, I can do that job better than you, I can do exactly what you're doing. For me, it's a collaborative thing. It's about saying, I'm a woman and I can do a job, and I don't need to be looked at, you know, in any specific way, any special way. You know, it's not about competition in any sense, any shape or form. For me, inclusion is about just making sure that everyone feels a part of something, and as women, we can also, you know, help to achieve great things. That's my view.
Thank you. Just following up on the sort of insights we've already had, I'm just going to give you sort of my experience about being a female player in what is a predominantly sort of perceived male sport. I first started playing back when I was 9 years old in primary school. I think I was fairly lucky because in my primary school there wasn't really many gender issues or inequalities between sports. So we had to do it in PE. The coach came in and we didn't have a choice. The girls did it, the boys did it. We had boys on our netball team. We used to go to schools to play fixtures, and they were sort of, well, you've got a boy on your netball team, we can't play you. Well, there's no rules to say you're not allowed. We had girls in the football team. So in my primary school, when there's a few hundred, very small, it was very inclusive and it was very welcoming, and there was no sort of, oh, you're playing rugby, you shouldn't be doing that because it's a boys' sport, which was fantastic. So I loved it. I played all the way through primary school, went and joined a local club outside of primary school, so again there was 2 girls in the team, and the club was fantastic, but we'd go and play other clubs and they were sort of saying, you've got girls on your team, that's not allowed. But again, there was no sort of rules to say that you couldn't. I think up until the age of 12 you were allowed to play mixed rugby. So you got a bit of stick, but your teammates, because they were around you and made you feel part of that team and part of something, you sort of brushed it off. So off we went to secondary school, and there was no rugby there for girls, and it was very much your traditional. Girls played netball, girls played hockey, boys did football, boys played cricket. And when you sort of say, oh, I'm going to go to rugby training tonight, they kind of get some funny looks and you shouldn't play. And I think then you sort of start to pick up what the inequality actually is. You're kind of in your little bubble in primary school at 11 years old, and then you start to get into the big wide world and kind of pick up on the fact that actually there are people with opinions out there that might not be what you were used to and the support that you've had growing up. So that didn't deter me. And then obviously got to 12 years old and couldn't play mixed rugby anymore. So really tried hard to set up our own women's girls rugby team. And we sort of probably had half a dozen here and there, and girls that came now and then, but not really enough to have a team. And we trained, and we might get the odd numbers together to play a match, but sort of not really enough to have the continuation of what I'd had previously. But that sort of didn't deter me. I was, like you said, very focused. I love rugby. I loved all sport, to be honest. I played for a netball club, I went to athletics, but rugby was the sport that I really had connected with. So I wasn't going to be put off by it. And then sort of when I was about 15, more development had been done, and they were setting up, and there'd been actually money put in by the governing body, the Rugby Football Union, to sort of try and drive female participation. So off I went along and haven't really looked back since, and I've gone on through club, through sort of county and regional, and off to national trials, and got to where I am today really, playing for the senior side. But along that way there has been sort of questions asked about, you're a girl, you play rugby, a bit like you got asked your question about the golf. Is it proper golf? So you play rugby, are the rules the same? Do you play the same as the men? And it's like, yeah, you tackle each other. Is that right? What? Contact rugby? Yes, that's right. All the rules are the same, there's no difference at all, apart from 15 women and there's 15 men playing that game. So it's kind of people's perceptions out there have been very traditional, especially rugby used to be perceived, and it has changed quite recently, quite dramatically recently, about being sort of a middle-class white male sport. So the Rugby Football Union are working really hard to try and change that perception that it's a game for all, no matter what gender or race or background you're from. So there's some of the challenges that we've had to come, or I've had to overcome as a female athlete in a male sport, and it is getting a lot better. The perception of women playing the game is definitely changing, and I think over my time involved, especially in the sort of international setup, we've sort of seen that when I first got my first cap back in 2007, The men had these nice Nike shirts with this lovely rose, and before we moved to Canterbury, O2 sponsorship, and we were sponsored by Gilbert. Nothing wrong with Gilbert, brilliant. But we had sort of a different rose. It was sort of a bud, like a rosebud that hadn't quite blossomed yet. And there was this kind of like, oh, we're the English national team, but we're not quite ready for the rose that the rest of the English national teams and governing body have. So that's just the start of the sort of the changes that have happened. We're now completely, we had our own separate governing body. It was the Rugby Football Union for Women. It wasn't integrated into the men's governing body, and that's changed. So last year they integrated as one, and there was changes up until then. We'd got the rose by that stage, but we've seen masses of change, how that we're now fully integrated as one governing body, the sponsorship that we now have, and the support that we're giving is a lot better than it has been, and that's great for a growing sport, and we're certainly looking to have been on that road, and I think it's only going to get better. And I think one of the big changing points for me was back in 2010, we hosted the Women's World Cup in England, down in Surrey, and the media coverage that it got was starting to pick up. So Sky hosted, had the rights for the games, the pool games, all our games were shown live, and then I think the World Cup final was the sort of real turning point, I think, for a lot of female players noticed it, that we sold out the Stoop, which is the ground opposite Twickenham, but the atmosphere that it was, there was 14,000 people that had come to watch, and it was shown like worldwide on Sky Sports, and the viewing figures, I think, for that day, there was other significant male rugby games on that day, and actually we drew in more than the men's games. And so unfortunately for England, we lost, and it wasn't a great day to look back on, but it was fantastic to have been part of that. So after that, I went away on holiday with my family, and bumped into some people that we knew. They had some friends staying with them, and one of them was a die-hard Harlequins fan, and he had kind of seen, because Harlequins is play at the Stoop, just for those that don't know, and he'd kind of seen and been along to sort of advertising, and thought, oh, I'm going to give this a go. I might go along and watch. I think they got it with their season ticket or something. And before that, he was very honest with the conversation, saying about his perception of women. They can't run, they're sort of butch and big, and sort of the general perception of women, female rugby player. And he said, watch the first game. He said, I was quite impressed by it. He was like, you were all actually quite skillful. You could run, and you could catch, and you could pass. I was like, thanks. He said, and you didn't keep kicking it away like they did in the men's game. And it was quite exciting to watch. It wasn't boring. I was like, oh, that's very kind of you to say. And he said, so I got on the email, and wrote an email to all my friends and told them they have to get along to watch the next game. And I just thought, that's one person, just by being able to watch it through the media, through the promotion, that has changed their perception by it being out there. And I just thought that was quite sort of humbling to think that that's the route it needs to go. And that was sort of a turning point since sort of that World Cup. The BBC show our Six Nations games, Sky, we played on Saturday against France in the Six Nations. Unfortunately, the result didn't go away, but Sky broadcast that game live, which was fantastic. Like Shelley says, the media days at Salford, I went along last year, and it's great to have all this promotion and being on one day, being able to do all the different things, and you get sort of my next door neighbours telling my mum, they've got young kids, saying, oh, I saw Sarah on Newsvan, and it's a bit odd. So I think for us in our sport, the fact that it is male sort of orientated, and that kind of the media side is massive for us. It's so much better than it has been, but there's so much further for it to go, I think, and the fact that we have people that are willing to get behind us and really promote us and sort of show the rest of sort of the world that actually female in sport is a good thing, it's a positive thing. We can create positive role models for people not only within sport itself but outside. I mean, within rugby especially, the core values that rugby has in terms of the sportsmanship, the teamwork, the respect that it shows to the rest of the players and the officials and everything it has, I think is great for just young children and just the way of life, really. So it's never going to be solved overnight, but we're going a long way to changing the perceptions and sort of the inequalities within sport, and I think that's just what I've experienced, and I hope it's just been an insight into sort of the changes that are occurring.
Hello, my name is Lottie, Birdsall-Strong, and my background is in sport, so I started playing for Arsenal when I was 7. I was in the first under-10s team that they had, which was great, and I stayed there till I was 16, and I was involved with the England youth squad throughout that time as well, and London County. And I then went out to America on a scholarship to play in North Carolina, which was a really remarkable experience. And that's where I sort of began to develop an interest in the difference between the way the UK and the US deal with women's sport and women in sport. And I guess coming back from America, I decided to try and work on that in a more intellectual way and try and understand how this had come to be. So I'm now researching equality policy and legislation in sport through the state education system, and that's what I'm currently doing at Cambridge. The law that was the big thing that developed sort of more emotional, social and cultural interest within me is a law called Title IX in the United States. And Title IX, it's a really big law and it's really complicated, and it permeates a lot of different things. But the bit that I'm interested in is the aspect of it that it impacts female athletes and young ones, but mainly from the sort of grassroots level up. So Title IX, broadly speaking, means that it ensures that all students in the United States that belong to education systems that are funded by the state, so basically all education systems that aren't private, have to distribute resources and funds equally in terms of gender. And this went through in 1972 in America, and we still don't have an equivalent. So we're really far behind on that. And Title IX had a huge impact on participation rates of females in sport. Since Title IX was passed, participation rates have gone up by 403%, which is remarkable. And there is counter-argument. It's important not to confuse cause with correlation. Students in here, social scientists will know that, but there is a lot of evidence to suggest that Title IX has been a cause, a big factor of the growing rate of female sport in the US. So at the moment, my stance on the kind of inequalities in sport is that we need to look at policy. It might be a bit of a cynical position, but for me, until we implement something in our state education system that absolutely guarantees that female students are being given the same opportunities in terms of resource and economy to participate in sports, as their male counterparts. Until that's ensured, it seems very difficult to see how we're going to make big change. I think we have to move forward generationally, and that's why I think that the state education system is the biggest opportunity that we've got to start making some change in terms of attitude, but also literal participation. So I'm currently researching, working on a proposal to pass a UK equivalent to Title IX, and that's something that I presented evidence to Parliament about, which is something that Rimla also did, and the inquiry was really important. I think it was it was an important step to show that the powers that be are taking note that this is a real issue, this is a problem we've got. What comes out of the inquiry remains to be seen, and it's going to be, I think, a long battle. But I think for me, policy is the way we have to change things if it's going to be meaningful, and then I think the rest hopefully will come. And I think that's that for me. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jess. So just a personal account, basically, of my experiences with sport and inequality. For me, sport has always been a massive part of my life. I've played football since I was about 5 years old. It wasn't just football, I tried athletics, karate as well. When I was younger, my mum always tells me the story of when I was about 2-3 years old. She threw me a ball, and instead of catching the ball, throwing it back, I caught the ball, put it on the floor, and kicked it back. And that's basically when she reckons my kind of love affair with football began. I carried on playing football through primary school, and I wouldn't say at that point my being a female was an issue, but I was the only girl on the team, and I was aware that perhaps I was doing something different to all the other girls in primary school. And it wasn't until I got to secondary school that I realised how much of a freak I was. I was lucky enough to go to a school that had a women's team, so I had, quite a few football-loving women to interact with, but at the same time, we were still a minority, and boys in the school would often take the opportunity to hurl abuse, like geezer bird and tomboy. So as a young teenage girl, it made me very conscious of my gender and my love for sport. So I'd almost try and hide it, really. I would, to girlfriends and stuff, I would say, yeah, I like football, but, it's not a big deal. It's like, I'd play it down to make myself feel more normal and fit in. So then when I went to university, on the whole, I was still playing football, but on the whole I felt that there was such an obvious inequality between men's sport at university, women's sport at university. I felt that we had less access to top facilities, less promotion and exposure, and on the whole it just seemed like men's sport was getting a lot more TLC, to be quite honest. And then I got into the working world, studying to become a journalist, and it continued really. It was like, since I became a journalist, I've always questioned why, when you turn to the back pages of a newspaper, there aren't more women featured, or when you watch a news bulletin, why no women featured? Why is that? What's the problem? And why, on the rare occasion that they are featured, are they kind of set up as like a sideline to the main events, or continually compared to their male counterparts? So yeah, I think there is a definite and quite blatant inequality in sport. Things like funding, sponsorship, media coverage, participation are all so much lower than they could be because, in my opinion, this country doesn't value a sportswoman as much as it values a sportsman. And then, you can take into consideration other issues like race. If you're a woman of colour, it makes it much harder. If you're non-heterosexual, it makes it harder. If you have a disability or you come from a different class, all these issues also play into the fact that, you know, there's just so many barriers affecting women. But on the positive side, a lot of progress has been made and is being made at the moment. Things have changed, and I know that when young girls play football now, it is a lot different. It's a lot different because boys aren't as necessarily so opposed to the idea, which I think is important. And I think it's important to get the concept of equality across from a very young age, which makes it then easier to kind of instill as they become adults. Also things like media coverage has definitely improved. I have to say BBC are leading the way, people like Shelley leading the way with that. The BBC are showing more women's sports than ever before, showing more women's sports than any other broadcaster. And there are, you know, there's campaigns, there's quite high profile campaigns. Stonewall, for example, released Rainbow Laces recently to highlight the homophobia in football. People like Kick It Out, racism campaigns, and they recently even held an event at the Etihad to try and improve the kind of take-up of women into football. There's governing body schemes like Back to Netball and Back to Hockey, which focus on getting women into the sport and participating again. And then the government, actually. The government have said that it's now a priority for them to look at the barriers and what exists as to why women do not participate in sport, why there are 1.7 million more men than women that play sport. And there's an inquiry actually ongoing as we speak, looking at the barriers affecting women in sport. So there is a lot of positivity, but I think we need to continue the way we're going, being more open-minded and just ensuring that there's this level of education to show people that it's important. And women are no less able to play sport than men, essentially.
I was just wondering, this is, I guess, a question to everyone. What do you think the aim is? Do we want women and men to be in the sport together? Do we want women's sport to be really recognised? Yeah, I guess, what do you want out of all of this?
From my perspective, that question that you put in particular about should we play together, etc. I think the point is you need to have an option for anything. The point is, I mean, in terms of participation, you should be able to participate in whatever way that you want to. And at the moment, the opportunities aren't there to allow that participation or that choice to happen. I think that's what we're saying right across this table. I think for me personally, I always say it's about role models. We don't see, as Jess said, enough female sportswomen out there in the papers, in the media. But from my perspective as well, and Jess sort of touched on this, we don't see a diverse range of role models. We might see the same faces that are put up there for potentially the wrong reasons. They're probably on the front page rather than the back page. But we don't necessarily see a diverse range of women in sports, not just playing, but actually the likes of Shelley, the likes of Jess, etc., who are positive role models, real role models, I would say real models rather than role models. We don't see enough of those people at the moment, so young girls that are growing up won't necessarily say, I want to be a sports journalist, or I want to play rugby for England, or I want to play football for England, or whatever sport it is. That's the key thing for me.
I think, for me, the opportunity to participate is a really, really big thing. I think it has to be the starting point. And at the moment, you know, the UK system is such that, in terms of, well, lots of things, but particularly in terms of gender and sex, opportunity to participate in sport and PE is not equal. And, you know, PE is a part of the core curriculum, and if you apply it to any other subject, it would be madness. You know, you can't imagine sitting in a classroom and having male students given a history textbook and the female students not. but boys are being given footballs in PE, and in a lot of schools girls aren't. So, you know, opportunity to participate, I think, is the biggest thing for me in terms of what I would like out of such pursuit. And I think on a kind of wider level, I think, you know, sport is in this country and elsewhere, of course, is gendered, and that's a real problem. One of the biggest things that I'd like to see change is that we stop referring to sport as sport and then women's sport as women's sport, because that's something that we've managed to do, and it's a disaster. Because what we're doing is, you know, the discourse, the semantics of that is so damaging. So what we have is football and then women's football. So football is the case as male, and then a deviation of that is women's football. And so if every broadcaster in the country from tomorrow started referring to football as men's football when it was men playing it, it would be a huge, huge change to the psyche of the way in which we understand it. Because then all of a sudden children would be thinking, if there's men's football, there's probably women's football. And, you know, men's football, sport and football, and, you know, I talk about football a lot because that's what I know about and what I'm passionate about, but it applies to all of sport. And, yeah, the way in which we genderize sport is really damaging, and it's little details like that I think would make a really big difference. So for me, the sort of the two biggest things. One, I suppose, is more normative than the other. But I think that it's targets like that we need to start implementing, and I would really like to see the state systems and the government and media institutions taking that on as a duty, because it's not right that we do that.
Just to add to what said, I agree that I think it's about having the opportunity, about both female and males having the opportunity to play sport and taking the sort of genderised outfit. And I think, speaking from the work that I do in terms of working for a governing body, the Rugby Football Union, is they've got a massive part to play, like governing bodies within sports, in terms of, I agree completely with Jess about the fact that it has to be right from an early age, in terms of especially looking at secondary schools as well. I completely agree with your point about, if you get it right at secondary school, then that's when you're very impressionable. That's when you make your thoughts and plans and have sort of such learnings done and developings done at that age. And governing bodies are making a difference. I mean, we've now got a specific grow team looking to grow rugby in certain areas and different. So it looks at how you can look at rugby for all, so like touch rugby, so if you don't want to play contact, but a massive part of their programme is to look at women's rugby and how they can ensure that more females are playing rugby around the country and get them involved in the game. And a lot of those programmes are being specifically targeted at secondary schools. They have specific women's programmes where the community rugby coaches will go in and deliver to the girls in the secondary schools, and there'll be competitions from it. We have an all-schools programme which is not genderised, so for one school it might be that they want to get boys rugby out, the other school down the road might want girls rugby. They have not, it's not specific, it's whatever's needed for the school that wants it and what they want to promote. So I do think a lot of it has, and that's really positive, and that's taken God knows how many years of the Rugby Football Union being involved to get to this stage. And like I said before, it's not going to happen overnight, but a lot of onus is on what other people can do, whether that's the government, whether it's government bodies, whether it's media. And it's pleasing to see eventually that the RFU are really doing some positive things out there specifically for women and girls rugby and to grow it. So, and letting them know what opportunities are there to play, whether it's at school or whether it's at a local club.
Just before Christmas, I was at the Millennium, and it was a Six Nations Women's Growing the Game. And Ireland, the Irish Rugby stood up, and of course they won. Sorry to remind you, Sarah. They won the Six Nations last year. And they were talking about how the trophy travelled 16,000 miles around Ireland, visiting primary schools and secondary schools, and how this has had an enormous impact. And rugby union is being played now in lots and lots of schools. Girls are playing it. And that's sort of another part of the equation. If you win something, it's very powerful, it's very inspirational. So that's a really good thing. But back to what Lottie was talking about, and you mentioned about primary schools. Baroness Sue Campbell, some of you may know, was head of UK Sport and was really instrumental over the 10 years she was there of making the funding gender neutral, which is what we all want, gender neutral. And that, of course, laid the groundwork for all those medals that the women won. And I heard her speak last year, and she was a PE teacher. And she said that when young people do their PGCE to be a teacher for primary schools, they get 4 hours in the whole year of tuition, 4 hours on what to do in PE. And that's just astonishing that, that they would go so ill-equipped into a school where they have to take 30 plus little ones. And it's really interesting, the Welsh Assembly at the moment, Sport Wales, Tanni Gray-Thompson is working with wonderful Professor Laura McAllister, who's head of Sport Wales, who's a professor at Liverpool University. And they were asked by the Welsh Assembly to look at early learning for young boys and girls at primary school. And they said to me that they thought the Welsh Assembly thought they'd come back with these huge list of recommendations and that they could just cherry pick a couple and sort of just bin the rest. And what Tanni Gray-Thompson said was, no, I've got one recommendation, and that is to make physical literacy as important as numeracy and literacy. And when you do that, you'll solve all the problems. And they've made, if you have a look on the internet, they've made this fantastic little video with this little girl who's about 6, and she's talking about that you only have until a child is 7 so that they learn to catch a ball, they learn to throw, they learn to, all those sort of physical literacy. And if they haven't learnt it by 7, it's almost like they never can learn it. And then that leads to that whole vicious cycle, and particularly with girls, is I'm not going to do PE. I hate sport. And I sit on the Premier League PFA Community Fund, which has £15 million to go to really sort of hard-hitting social inclusion projects. And when Derby County were in the Premier League a while back, they came to us. So we're working with youngsters in prison, and we're working with youngsters with disabilities and those at risk of joining gangs. And then this submission came in from Derby County saying, oh, we want to work with girls aged 11 to 16, and they want to do, we've asked them, and they want to do street dance and trampolining, and they want a fitness and beauty day as well. So we've gone in with Nike and we've gone in with Boots. And I'm the only woman on that panel, and all the other men went, what the is this? What has this got to do with football? And I had to really fight. I had to say, no, what they've done is really valuable. They've actually gone and asked the girls, what do they want to do? How do they want to engage in physical activity? And so I managed to get them to agree to do it. And it was so successful. It now is rolled out across all of Derby. The council funded it. At the Olympics, the street dance girls came down to Olympic Park. They had thousands of people watching them. And then what was really gratifying, there's a Sport England funded initiative called Us Girls, which is 14 to 25-year-olds to get disadvantaged women into sport, operating all over the country. And they told me, the Us Girls told me that, who would run it, said that they looked at the movement, which is what this was called at Derby County. And this sort of brings me back to this whole thing about we need women in all sectors. You need women on boards, because if I wasn't on that board, they just would have chucked it away. And I just finished with a fantastic example of that. Some of you may know about the boat race. Last year, Helena Morrissey, CEO of a huge investment company, started sponsoring the boat race. But she said, hold on a minute, why do we sponsor the men's race and we don't sponsor the women's race? And why is the women's race 2 weeks before tucked away on the Thames somewhere, not sort of in London, at Henley? And she said, this can't be right. So what she's done is she said, I'm only sponsoring this race if we have equal sponsorship for the women. So, and also, they will race a couple of hours before the men on the same day, on the same course. And in fact, it's not going to be this year because she realises that the money has to go in this year to
We have to have good, that's another thing, you know, it has to be a really compelling, exciting sport. And so next year, the women's boat race will be live on telly as part of the whole package of the boat race. And that's what you can get when a woman really cares and understands how to affect change. So I think right from, you know, primary up to someone head of a big multi-million-pound company, we've got to galvanise people.
Just a quick point, but to answer the question, what is the aim? I think just to start with something as simple as funding. When in like younger years, we're talking like primary school years, there tends to be kind of equality in funding, and girls and boys get the same amount if they want to play a sport. They get to about 15, 16, and then women's funding just kind of falls off. It just kind of evaporates, and it's just not there. Which means they then have to, you know, ask their parents if their parents are around, and they're in a position to ask their parents for money to fund the sport that they love, or they have to think about getting a job. And already you're looking at other issues that women have to look at before they even can get into the sport and carry on and improve. And if you're thinking about a young 16-year-old girl that all of a sudden can't play football because she can't afford to, then she's not going to play. It's really that simple. Talking about football, because that's what I know about, people are always surprised when I say that I had to pay to play football, essentially. I would have to pay like a yearly fee to my club to cover things like match officials, kit, travel to away games, so essentially I was paying subs. And I was playing for a kind of a reputable, at the time, they were a Premier League team, and I was part of the Centre of Excellence. They were a Premier League team with God knows how many millions, but yet I had to pay to play. If I had been a boy at that point, they would have been throwing money at me. I probably would have had an agent and a sponsorship deal. It would have been ridiculous. So the aim is to stop the ridiculous inequality. It's just so blatant. It's completely unfounded as well, because research has been done, and people do actually want to see sports women. I say women in sport, but I try and stay away from that because it is just sport. It's not women's sport, you know, it's sport. People do actually want to see sports women. They do want to see sports women as role models, but it ties in again to the media, and then commercial investment, which is again really, really low for women's sport, and it just becomes a vicious cycle. But I think start with funding, just allow the women the opportunity to play, and if they're playing full-time, like the men, within a few years, the games will be just as competitive and just as compelling.
Kind of going on from that, and sort of what Lottie was saying as well, it kind of seems like within athletics, with Jessica Ennis and going back a while, Paul Radcliffe, those sort of women, they have their own, and people sort of accepted them for the sportswomen that they were and the feats that they were sort of achieving. The problem sort of still seems with the teams, so rugby and football and cricket and, like you're saying, golf. It just seems that we're still not getting it, that they can do it too, that they're just as equal as men. So is it sort of coverage that we need? Is it that we just need to sort of push that up and try and sort of force people into realising, or I mean, I don't know, what you do?
For me, I think media coverage is so important. I think, although participation as a result of the women's participation in sport as a result of the Olympics hasn't really done too much, I think just showing women on an equal platform with the men, I think personally helped so much. Since the Olympics, I was actually lucky enough to be there, and since then I've spoken to so many different people, interviewees, people that I've just happened to have a conversation with have said, oh yeah, my daughter, my niece, my goddaughter watched blah blah, Jessica Ennis for example, loved it and wants to now try this. So I genuinely think it has had an effect. So media coverage is so important. women's team sports do get a much harder time of it. I know that from playing football, but don't be fooled by the fact that Jessica Ennis is now a superstar. She's the exception, she's not the rule. At one point in the run-up to the Olympics, if you typed Jessica Ennis into Google, and you, as you know, Google now predicts what you think, it came up with a load of sexual connotations, a load of sexual words like boobs, bum, as in to finish your sentence. So these women are still objectified. They still face the same challenges. And someone like Louise Hazel, for example, who is another British heptathlete, she had to have 12 sponsors in the run-up to London 2012 just to get there. 12. I don't know personally of any male athlete that's had to have 12 sponsors in the run-up to a home Olympics. It was absolutely incredible. So Jessica Ennis, great. Paula Radcliffe, brilliant. Talented women. We celebrate the talents, but they are the exceptions. They definitely are not the rule.
I think it's also important to remember that, you know, the problems that women in sport face are, you know, they are part of a wider cultural issue, and this is just a manifestation of it. This is just one manifestation of it, you know. So I think that's really important. It's not the other way around. I think that's important to remember, and I think you know, we've got a real problem in this country right now. The way in which women who happen to adopt what are deemed desirable positions, whether that be in work or sport or whatever, are getting a really, really hard time. And, you know, I think I would anticipate, okay, you know, individuals seem to have an easier time, but, you know, what is it that's more threatening about a team of women than one? You know, I mean, I'm not going to start, you know, talking about Foucault or anything, but, you know, there's an insecurity here that's being tapped into, and I think, you know, groups of women doing something is always going to be scarier than one woman doing something. And I think also, you know, it's a lot easier to objectify one woman into a safer position, you know, the kind of Madonna-Hall dichotomy of media. You know, it's safer, it's easier, it's quicker to kind of accept or reject or place one woman. You know, a team of women, well, that's just terrifying.